The first practice, and this is the first pricing practice that could violate abuse of dominance, is what we call predatory pricing, where the name speaks for itself. The predatory pricing is, in general, the situation in which you find a firm who tries to set the price to be so low, such a level that if the competitors have to compete against this firm, it would acquire loss. And it would acquire loss in the sense that it should not even start to do the business at all, or it should actually exit the industry. But once that happens and there's no competitor remains, then this very firm who set this predatory pricing regime could then raise the price again to enjoy the monopoly profit. So that is the general idea of it. Well, we're going to discuss what exactly it is and what's the purpose of it, and why there are so many arguments saying that this is not sensible, it shouldn't be done, and what sort of evidence that we need in order to prove that there's this predatory pricing practice in reality. And then we have a look at some of the cases that used to happen before we move on to see what has been written in the Trade Competition Acts of Thailand to deal with this predatory pricing. So as I said, the predatory pricing is essentially a practice where a firm or the business operator set the price so low such that other firms in the market are unable to enter or are forced to exit. Are unable to enter in the sense that when firms decide to enter certain markets, what it needs to consider is the profitability. And if you are a firm that are looking into the market and you see the price level, and if you look back into your own cost structure or evaluate your cost structure, and you see that if you have to compete against this firm and you have to set the price at low, you're going to acquire loss, and there's no reason to enter the market at the very beginning. Okay, and the same goes for the firm that are existing in the market. Once you dump the price down to the very low level, and if that firm do not decrease the price to the level that match this very low level price, then all consumers or most consumers will pretty much switch to the lower price product. And that means that by these competitions, you will need to decrease the price as well. But by doing that, it will fall below your cost, and you would acquire loss from doing that. And eventually, if you have to do that for a certain period or for too long, then the alternative is that you just close your factory or close your firm and stop your production and exit the market in practice. What I meant here by saying that imperfect information is needed is that if you know, say that firm A designed to have this predatory pricing by pushing the price to very low, even lower than its own cost. Then if you are firm B who is operating in the market and you see this level of price very low and it is much lower than your cost, if you happen to know what's the level of cost, right? What's the level of cost, especially the variable cost of this firm A? If you happen to know this, and you see that this is like much lower than the average variable cost of firm A, what you would do is you will see that this is just a temporary strategy. It is impossible, right? It is impossible that this particular firm A would be able to set the price to be this low for that long, because it just doesn't make sense. And eventually, if it keeps doing this, it would just go out of business. then it will make it really difficult for firm A to keep the price at that low level. And the same goes for the case where firm B is still out of the market, right? This is the boundary of the market. And firm B look inside. If firm B also happen to know the cost level of firm A, especially the variable cost, then firm B would definitely know that, okay, I don't think it makes sense for me to be afraid, because firm A could not sustain this level of price for that long anyway. That is why imperfect information is needed in this sense. But that makes sense because in reality we know that imperfect information is just so normal. You don't really know the cost or the exact cost of your competitors. And especially in the world where this business structure or the business organization is so complicated, it is very difficult for you to be able to evaluate the cost of your competitors. Predatory pricing seems to be evident and quite obvious, but also there are some counter arguments saying that, well, it is not quite sensible under so many circumstances and for so many reasons. One of that is that because most of the firms that can conduct this predatory pricing, especially in our context here, is a dominant firm. And by being a dominant firm, it means that your market share has to be quite high, right? Because you have this greater market share, it means that if you dump the price down to a very low level, you will suffer greater losses comparing to your competitors. So that's the first thing. The second thing is this. The second thing is the nature of predatory pricing is that once you dump the price to be a very low level, what you want to do is you will wait until your competitors exit the market, or you wait until you can be sure that no competitors would enter the market. Then you would increase your price again. But the thing is this, suppose you can force your competitor to exit the market. Well, when firm exit the market, it doesn't mean that that firm just pretty much demolish all the physical facilities, right? And it doesn't mean that it can eradicate all of the labor specialties. Well, it might fire some of its employees, but it doesn't mean that they can't be re-employed, or it doesn't mean that they can't reopen their facilities or their factory or production process. Which basically means that once you increase the price again and you enjoy this profit, then the exit firms could re-enter the market, or the existing facility could be purchased by some other firms or some other tycoons who are readily having these resources to reinvest and enter the market again. And then you have to go back to doing this predatory pricing once again. So that just doesn't make sense from that perspective. The third is that by being this predatory pricing, you would have to convince your financial supporter as well, right? You will need to convince your financial support in order to provide you the source of funding during this predatory pricing. And the last one is, by being a dominant player, the question is whether it makes sense or not for you as a dominant player to use this predatory pricing strategy, because this is probably the least profitable way of doing it, because in most cases there's no guarantee the length of time that you need to sustain this low level price, because you don't know how deep the pockets of your competitors are, and if they can secure the financial sources, then the period could be significantly elongated, and that will decrease the level of profit that you will get in the long run as well, because the period that you have to endure this losses would be longer, even though you can increase the price afterward, but there's a cap for that increase in price because the demand is still elastic to a certain extent. You can't increase your price arbitrarily because the demand in the market will control the price anyway. So some people just ask the question like, okay, so why don't you choose different strategies, say merge, right? Why do you have to kick these firms out of the market when if you are a larger firms, you can just simply merge with smaller firms and enjoy larger capacities and gain even better economies of scale as well. Having said that, the counter argument was made, and the sources from the book by Massimo Motta, if you want to read further in detail. Okay, for the first thing is in the sense that because you have greater market share as a dominant player, then if you do this predatory pricing, you would acquire greater loss as well. Well, the counter argument is that you can use this price discrimination, and that would alleviate the level of loss that you would acquire. We would touch this topic later, but the idea of price discrimination is very simple in the sense that some customers who are willing to pay more, you would charge greater price. And if you know that some customers are willing to pay less, you would reduce the price even further. Okay? So pretty much you sell different prices to different customers depending on their purchasing power or willingness to pay. That is called the price discrimination. The second is, as we said, the argument was that because the facilities are still there, the specialties are still there, so once you increase the price, someone could re-enter the market. The thing is this: if it's the new firm, then it is very difficult because sunk costs, even though economically it doesn't make sense, especially in theory, but sunk costs, okay, sunk costs are some costs that you have to pay up front, and you will never get that back. So, for example, you have to build your factory, okay, and you have to pay for the land, you have to pay for the construction of the factory. These are sunk costs because when you start your production, you will not get these costs back, right? They will just sunk. And it is true that in order to determine the level of production, you don't have to care about it. But once you have to start your business, this really matters because this is the amount of money that you have to pay, right? And there's another argument which is called a reputation model, saying that firms are not that rational. And one thing is that they will learn, even though they won't be the ones who enter the market, but other firms would have to look back into the history and see that, okay, I have seen what happened to those firms who were forced to exit the market, and I'm fearful that I could be one of them once I decide to enter the market. So this is sort of like you create a sort of credible threat, a reputation in the sense that once anyone dares to come into the market and compete against me, I can draw the sword and fight back using this predatory pricing model. Another thing is this, okay, that is the first two, right? The third thing is, and this is so important, because we are living in a world of imperfect information, and especially as an outsider, where you are in a situation where it is so difficult to determine the cost level of the incumbents or the firms that are operating in certain industry or in certain market. The best clue that you would be able to get is from looking at the price level, because I mean, in general, it makes sense for anyone to assume that firms will not set the price below the cost level, right? So what you would get, the information that you would acquire from having a look at this predatory pricing, price level under this regime, is that you would perceive that the cost level must be really low, which if it is true, then it means that this incumbent is really strong, very efficient, has a really low level of average cost, then you would not find it easy for you in order to enter the market and compete against this very efficient firm, even though that information is wrong, but you would never know, right? Because you think that they set the price low because they cost really low. You would not naturally think that, okay, they set the price low because they are using this predatory pricing. The third argument, the reason is very simple. Again, we are living in this imperfect information world, and financial institutions are not an exception. They're not that smart in order to understand all possibilities, all cost structures of every single firm, and they could be imperfectly informed as well, right? So when you say that, what's the reason that these larger firms would be able to convince financial institutions to support them during this predatory pricing regime? The same argument could go against a case where the smaller firms would be able to convince financial institutions to help them during this predatory pricing regime either. And the last one is these alternative strategies that the dominant firm can use in order to beat the competitors, especially like merger. One thing is that by having this merger as a possibility, what may follow is that you're giving the signal, right? If you have this card in the pocket, then you're giving the signal to the potential entrants to enter the market even more, because they know that once they enter the market, then the larger firm would acquire them anyway. And this is like truer and truer when you look into the certain situation now that so many smaller firms, especially in some particular industries that are very scalable, some smaller firms who are called startups, their founders incentives to enter the market are essentially to exit in eventual, which basically means they want to build up their business, they want to make it grow to a certain level, and then they want to sell it to the larger firms to exit the market. So if you are a firm or you're an incumbent and you decide to merge these smaller firms and you give this sort of signal out of the market, then people will find this is a very good opportunity to enter the market, which basically means that you have to confront this level of competition repeatedly. Or it could be as simple as the case where the merger could be prohibited by the commission, because if you consider the same in the sense that you are now currently a dominant player and you even merge and getting larger, then this is the situation where the commission would have a look at it and say that probably we cannot allow this merger to be materialized. And the last argument is that they can do both, right? They can actually force the smaller firms to acquire losses using this predatory pricing. And once the smaller firms are unable to sustain or to be operating in the market, then you just merge them at the lower price. So that's a card that's still available to be used as well. Consider how you would can detect how you would detect this predatory pricing in practice. Okay, you need to at least two pieces of evidence. The first one is you need to prove that a business operator has a dominant position. Okay, and the second is you have to prove, and usually by hard evidence, that there is a short-run profit sacrifice. The question is, why do you need this market power or having this dominant position? Because the same action, the same predatory pricing actions, or seemingly the same, could be done by smaller firms as well who are not a dominant player in the market. And so what basically means is that smaller firms can use predatory pricing to beat some constraints in order to survive in the market or to be able to grow eventually. For example, you might need to use this predatory pricing to beat the switching costs. Okay, because as a new entrant into the market, you need to attract consumers who are currently enjoying or consuming certain products, and you want these consumers to try your product in order for them to know that your product exists, to understand the quality or the characteristic of your product better. And by doing that, you need to invest in order to convince them to try your product. And the promotion is one of the most important thing. Okay, so that is what we mean by switching costs, right? People find it difficult to pretty much depart from what they are familiar with. Or these network externalities. If you recall, what I mentioned earlier, that this network effect is something that could create what is called the locked-in effect. People, I mean, we are using Facebook, we are using certain product because our friends or families are using it as well. And as a new entrant, if you would like to attract consumers, most of the time this is not just one or two consumers, but you have to attract a chunk of consumer, a substantial portion of consumers for them to try your product at once. And that is how you would overcome this network externalities. And you also might need to beat these steep learning curves, which basically means that, for example, if people are so familiarized themselves with a Microsoft Word or certain products already, they have been so familiar with it because they have been using this Microsoft Word or certain softwares or certain environment for so long, for a decade or ever since they start using computer. In that case, if you are going to launch the new product, if you are going to launch the new environment or new software with maybe quite different user interface or maybe quite a different user journey, what you need to do is, you can't say that, okay, I'm launching this product, is really good, but you have to pay me like say 10,000 baht because it's really good. No, you can't do that, even though your cost is really high as well, because research and development in this software market is not cheap. You have to invest a lot of human resources, a lot of capital, and also so many failures are very likely along the way, and that is also a part of the cost as well. In that case, when you have to convince people to come and learn using this, it would take time, and during that process, they can't. You would probably have to be closely monitoring their learning as well, and that is another chunk of cost that you have to spend. So this is pretty much the steep learning curves, and you can't pose a high price for them because, I mean, let alone the level of effort that they have to put in order to learn how to use your environment, they will not be willing to pay for your product. So this is why you come up with some sort of premium, sort of freemium or free software for trial, or when you launch your product at the very beginning, you just let people use it for free so they get exposed to this environment. And again, it goes back to the previous example of network externalities, that you need a good critical mass of people who learn this thing at the same time, right? So that is the situation in which the smaller firms might need to use this predatory pricing to keep the price at a very low level and usually free. And the last thing is the product complementarity. Okay, because sometimes the smaller firms would have to use this predatory pricing because it will need to penetrate into the market, and it knows that some of the products are complement to each other, and by having this low level price, it would open the opportunity for its other products to be able to get into the market as well. Right. So I think the key message here is we need to understand that predatory pricing is not always bad. It could be used by some smaller firms in order to beat certain constraints, especially to be able to allow consumers to get exposed to new products, new services, and at the end of the day, that increase the possibility or the alternatives for consumers, and that would improve their welfare in eventual. That was the first bit, which is the firm has to be a dominant business operator. The second bit of the criteria is the short run profit sacrifice, because this is by definition the nature of the predatory pricing. Suppose you have an optimal price, okay, say P star. Well, the problem is this: whenever you charge the price below P star, should it be considered predatory pricing? Well, not really, because okay, the first problem is how would you come up with this P star? We know that in theory, P star is a price level where marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost, because at this level of pricing, you would get you would get a maximum level of profit. But in reality, this is not as simple, because there are so many factors that the price could be below that level, or this level is undetermined whatsoever. Right, so this is not sensible. Well, what you can probably prove by empirical evidence in reality is the negative profit. Once you could acquire firms' cost data, then you will know the average cost, you will know the average variable cost and average fixed cost of the firm. And if you compare that to the price level, you would be able to say something, especially if the price is below a certain level of cost. So this is really important, and you would now understand why we need to talk about this cost structure at the very beginning of the lecture. If price is greater than the average total cost, then this should be fine. You should not hold anyone liable, even if you feel that the price is slightly lower than the optimal level, because you can't really say what the optimal level is. But as long as the price is greater than average total cost, you should not hold anyone liable. Right? Because at the end of the day, this is the way that you are trying to govern the market, and it has to be clear to a certain extent that that particular business operator is doing something bad. If it is that unclear, you should give the benefits of the doubt to the business operators. Okay. And the second case is where the price is in between the average total cost, is lower than average total cost, but it is still higher than average variable cost. And as you previously see, right, that in this case this is possible because once you get larger and you gain the benefit from the economies of scale, the average fixed cost will getting lower and lower. So as long as the price is above the average variable cost, it might be the certain level of production that firm acquires positive profit in eventual, even though now or at any moment in time it is acquiring loss when you compare price to the average total cost. Right? So in this case, in general and including the case of Thailand, the burden of proof that the predatory pricing is ongoing has to be on the plaintiff. For example, the commission has to prove it, or other firms who excuse this particular firm or business operator for conducting this predatory pricing. But the last case is where the price is low enough, okay, where the price is below average variable cost. You think of the gym's example. when you charge the membership fee lower than the cost that you have to hire that exclusive trainer, then this is dubious, right? Because what's the point of getting these consumers in a certain period? What? Because when you acquire one consumers, then you have to hire the trainer and you pay trainer greater than the membership fee that you get from your customers, and that doesn't really make much sense business wise. In this case, when your price is lower than average variable cost, the burden of proof now would be switched to the defendant, which is the business operator that gets excused of doing predatory pricing. But surely, what you need to do is you need to have some other evidence, hard evidence as well, which is what we call the objective proof. Okay, which basically means that they're doing that with sound business reason. They're not doing that just to beat their competitors temporarily and then to drive their competitors out of the market or to prevent any potential entrants. And one thing that you need to prove is the rate of success or the damage on consumers. Right, so these are the things. So at the end of the day, we are talking about this rule of reason practices. This is not illegal per se, right? And when it comes to rule of reasons, you have two baskets that you need to weight. This is the negative effect that could occur from having this dominant position and having this practice of predatory pricing. And this is the benefit, right? Sometimes you can call it efficiency gain. Right, so essentially this is the positive effect. So it is still the weighting between these two factors or these two baskets, so you have to fill them out with the evidence. Example where European Commission accused the Deutsche Post for conducting predatory pricing. The Deutsche Post was active in two main businesses. The first one is the mail service, the mail service, and another one is the parcel services. Okay, this is mail service, this is parcel, right? The fact is this: Deutsche Post was a monopoly in the mail service. Okay, so pretty much it gains a lot of profit from this mail service. And what the European Commission found in the evidence is that it used this profit to subsidize this parcel in order to compete against. So this is it used to be a monopoly, right? But this parcel service, you have a lot of competitors, and one of the main competitors is UPS, which is another firm, another business operator in the industry of this parcels delivery service. The evidence shows that there were losses in parcel delivery for the Deutsche Post for 5 years in consecutive. And that is abnormal, that you would acquire loss for that many years. And also you find the evidence, the European Commission also found the evidence that the profit in this mail service has been wired to subsidize the activities in the parcel service, despite the fact that the parcel services, by this pricing structure and the cost structure, acquiring loss for 5 years in consecutive. So this is the case where the Deutsche Post was found guilty in this predatory pricing conduct. As I mentioned earlier, we have to be so careful when we consider this predatory pricing just having a look at the price level, because in some particular industries this pattern could happen where you have a very low price at the very beginning of a certain period and then you increase the price afterwards. But this is not the absolute evidence of predatory pricing. It could be just because of the nature of the industry itself. So for example, you look at this high-tech industry. The concern is that the high-tech industry has a really high fixed cost. It doesn't matter how many units of production you will produce, but you have to pay for R&D, right? You have to pay for your research unit, pay for the scientists, pay for the materials that your scientists or your researchers have to use, and also you have to pay for the projects without knowing that project would be used as the end product or not. It could be just another case of failure, but you have to take risks. All these factors would make a high fixed cost. And when you have this high fixed cost, it means that at the very beginning, what you need to do is you probably have to set the price to be not that high. In the sense that if you have to set the price to cover all of your costs, it is quite problematic because no consumers would decide to buy your product, right? And that includes the case where you have this sort of nature of network externalities, where you have to, if you are launching any product, you have to attract consumers. And by attracting consumers, then you can't set your price to be so high, right? This is not just the consumers either, because, well, you can talk about users, but the indirect network externalities is from the developers and the communities that these developers have to write your software. So say that you are launching some certain product, say Apple OS. Well, you can't develop all the apps yourself, right? You need some developers, actually a big group of developers to create apps to respond to different needs of users, because there are like huge variety of needs for different types of consumers. And in that sense, you need another large community of developers to join your community, to use certain criteria or certain specifications of your software in order to create the apps, and that would allow more users to join your community as well. So this two-sided market create the needs that probably at the very beginning you can't charge the price that high. But that is quite contradictory to the fact that you have to invest on these R&Ds quite aggressively. Therefore, during the certain period, you might need to reduce the price to a certain level to attract more consumers, or even like reduce the price to zero, and that is definitely lower than your average variable cost. But you have to do that not to exploit consumers or not to beat your competitors, to kick them out of the market, but just to be able to compete, just to give the opportunity for consumers to try your product and see how good your product or your service is. And eventually, when consumers familiarize with your products or services, they will be more willing to pay. They know the value of it, and now you can start to increase your price to the realistic level. In this case, you should not consider this as the predatory pricing, because this is a normal business operation. And what is more essential is the fact that without doing this, you will not be able to introduce competition in the long run. The healthy competition where not just consumers, but the economy as a whole and also the firms would be able to enjoy.